Good afternoon. I'm Gregory and I'm here to teach you how I make my sourdough bread. So here I am with 420 grams of King Arthur all-purpose unbleached flour. I have my sourdough starter, which is beautiful, smells wonderfully fruity and fragrant, and is ready for use. I fed it 2 days ago and leave it in the fridge, and now it's ready to use. At least that's my equation for it. I have 10 grams of salt to put into this batch, and I'm also going to have 8 ounces of warm water. And what I do with this water is when I'm ready to use it, I put it into the Pyrex here, put it in the microwave for 30 seconds, and that's all I need. Alright, that's it for now, and we'll be back shortly with more. So what I do first with my recipe is I take my salt and I add it to the flour. As you see here, my 10 grams of salt are in here, my 420 grams of flour. Now that equates to approximately 2 teaspoons of salt and about 3.5 cups of flour. Do not pack the flour if you're using a dry measurement. Always weigh, it's better in my opinion, but if you don't have a scale, just make sure you don't overpack it. Alright, so here you see my sourdough starter. It's stirred down. You can see I've gotten the bubbles out of it, and if we look at the measurement, it's approximately 2 cups, and you know, that's as exact as that needs to be. I have my water. I put it in the microwave. I put 8 ounces in there, and I put it in the microwave for 30 seconds. That's all we need to warm it up for this batch. Alright, so we're going to pour all of this sourdough into the mixture of salt and flour, and we're going to start up the mixer. I'm using a KitchenAid mixer, and I'm cheating because I don't need this by hand. I need it all in the mixer, and it comes out great for me. So hopefully it will come out great for you if you follow the same method. So I'm going to get these ingredients in here. I'm going to get the dough hook on, and we'll continue. Okay, so I'm starting to mix these together, and I'm only going to mix them until the ingredients are wet and mixed just enough, and then we're going to let it rest for a while to autolyze. That's going to be about 20 minutes, so here we go. So I get the dough started first with the starter. Now I'm slowly going to add my warm water. The dough should be, a little wet. Sourdough is not a very stiff dough. And it looks like they're just about mixed together there, so I'm going to stop the mixer. We're going to pull out our dough hook, scrape it off, and I'm going to let that sit for about 20 to 30 minutes. This is what they call autolyzation, I guess, or they let it the dough autolyze at this point. I don't know who can tell you the truth about that. I'm going to cover this, and we'll be back in 20 minutes. So about 20 minutes or so have gone by since I last stopped the video, and we're going to continue with the kneading process. Now what's important at this point is to see that the bread dough is not too stiff yet. If it is too stiff, I'm going to have to add some water. So let's start mixing. You can see I have my mixer on the 3rd setting, which is number 4 on my KitchenAid mixer. And at the bottom there you can still see it's sticky in regard to being a dough. So I like to see that. That means my dough is not too dry and it's just wet enough. We're going to knead this for about 7 to 10 minutes. I may let it rest a couple times in order to reset the dough by getting what's collected on the hook off and mixing it back in. Eventually, This will all pull away from the sides and make one cohesive ball around the dough hook. So as the glutens form in this mixing process, you can see how the dough becomes stringier, and as it becomes even more stringy, for lack of a better word, that's what's going to help it stay together and form one cohesive ball. I shed a little light on here so you can see the texture and help you get an idea of what it should be looking like at this point. It's only been about 3 minutes of mixing. Great news. We're at the point where the dough is starting to pull away from the sides and stay as one cohesive ball on the dough hook. You see that the stickiness at the bottom is not as vast as it was earlier on. You got a lot of slapping against the sides, which is good for the kneading process. We're about at the 7-minute mark here. So I'm going to let that go for a few more minutes until I'm satisfied, and then we'll take another look. It's also very important to watch your mixer at this point, because you can see my mixer is starting to walk because it's off balance with the dough, which is probably a good indicator that we're done. But you don't want to leave your mixer alone with dough in it for this very reason. You can see all of the stickiness is off of the bottom. There's nothing sticking to the bottom at this point, and so we're ready to turn off the mixer and call it. That's beautiful. Look at that sheen on our dough. Look how it follows itself down into the bowl off of the dough hook. It's exactly what we want to see. Perfect. My dough hook is practically clean here. So we're going to take this off, I think. Take a look inside there. That's what you want your dough to look like. So what we're going to do here is we're going to let this rest for about 2 hours. Now, this is something you kind of have to get used to because right now it's warmer weather. I don't have a lot of air conditioning on in the house, so it could be higher humidity, so it could proof a lot more quickly if you want. Alright, my friends, you see that? That's the 2-hour mark. Let's get going. Okay, I have prepared my work surface. I've dusted it with whole wheat flour. This time, not white whole wheat, but actually just whole wheat flour. It's a little coarser. You can see you've got my favorite here, King Arthur flour. I use all my flours, if I can, from King Arthur. I use their unbleached, I use their white whole wheat, and I use their whole wheat. So 3 different flours that I like to bake with, depending on the results I'm looking for. So the whole wheat flour is here on my work surface. I've scattered some flaxseed also in the mixture here because I like to fold that into my dough and sprinkle some on top. Sometimes when we're baking we can moisten the top of the dough too, add more flaxseed if we want. Perhaps you want to add some oats to the top. We can look at that later. And here we go. So I'm going to take my dough out, just going to scrape it out gently onto the surface. It's coming out very nicely. Flaxseed also is very good for you. It's got stuff like omega-3s and probably stuff that's good for your skin. I don't know, but now that I have my dough out on my surface, I'm going to sprinkle another handful of flaxseed mixed with whole wheat flour on top. And we're going to just smooth that over We're going to do the tucking method. I fold and I tuck, and then I fold and I tuck. Look at those flax seeds just resting right there on the surface. That's wonderful. Another fold and tuck, and the last fold and tuck. Alright, and then we're going to turn it over, and we're going to roll it under. I'm going to keep tucking it and rolling it under with my fingertips. And make sure we have enough dusting on the outside to make that easy enough so that it doesn't stick to me. This will help get the air out. You don't want a whole lot of big air pockets in there, which they can get pretty big inside your loaf. Now some people like lots of pockets in their sourdough, but I like mine a little tighter than that. So that's my dough. I think it looks like it's got a good feel to it. It's got a nice shape. I like the texture of it. So let's put it into the Dutch oven. This right here is my cheat. It's a big cheat, but it's a great cheat. Because if you're going to make good sourdough bread, you want it to be crusty. That's my opinion. So if you're going to make it crusty, you need to keep some moisture in there. Now, a lot of people have tried putting loaves in the oven and dumping a cup of water on the bottom of the oven, or putting a pan at the bottom of the oven to get some steam in there. Well, this little baby right here is the answer to all that. This is a Dutch oven. If you don't have one, maybe you can fabricate one out of a roasting pan or something like that. But if you don't have one and you really want good sourdough bread, you got to get a hold of one of these. It has a lid. It's made of stone. There's the inside. We're going to put our dough right there in the bottom. We're going to close this baby up. I don't have to add a drop of water because all the moisture from the bread is going to stay right in here, and it's going to make it nice and crusty. So let's take a look at our dough over here. So here's my Dutch oven. I'm just going to spray the bottom with some no-stick cooking spray here. And take my loaf, put it in there. If I see any big pockets on the top, I'll pinch them out. And then we're going to let that rise in there for another 20 minutes before I bake. In case you're wondering, we're not going to preheat the oven. Once the dough has risen for about 15 to 20 minutes, we're going to put it here on the rack in the Dutch oven, closed up, for 45 minutes. After that, we'll take it out of the Dutch oven, place it directly on the rack for another 10 to 15 minutes to cook on residual heat. Once we've got the color that we want, we'll take it out of the oven and let it cool. So for now, I think we've reached the point of putting our Dutch oven inside, so let's go ahead and bring that along. So here I'm ready to start my oven. I've set it at 450 degrees for 45 minutes cook time. So I'm realizing I look like the Muppet Beaker in this thing. Well, I'm not really in it, I'm behind it. But these are my quick oats, or you could use normal oats. But one thing we didn't do in the interim, because I was running out of time and I needed to get this thing baked so I wasn't up all night, is to show you how to dust the top with some oats. And to do that, you're going to use a sprayer that you use only for food. You're not going to put chemicals in this. You reserve it just for water or other normal food related products. And you're going to spray the top just lightly with water, and that's enough water that if you take a handful of these oats and you spread them across the top, that they're going to integrate with the top of the dough as it bakes, and it gives you a nice multi-grain look, some texture, extra texture for when you toast your bread, and when you eat your bread, and it's a very nice touch. You can do the same with flaxseed if you want to put that on top, other kinds of seeds that people like to put on their breads. But mainly for me, it's oats or flaxseed. Another thing you can do is to score the top of your loaf. So in order to do that, you either have to have a layer of a dusting of whole wheat flour on top, or again, spray the top of the loaf. That will prevent your knife from sticking to the dough when you cut it. So you get a knife, good kitchen knife. Some people might say this is overkill, but I tend to use this knife for everything. You'll cut 3 parallel lines right across the top of the loaf, or however many parallel lines you want, and that'll let the loaf kind of breathe and expand without cracking the top of the loaf. Personally, I like it when the top of the loaf cracks. We have a little fun trying to figure out what shape it's in and try to predict the future, kind of like reading tea leaves. I don't really believe I can read the future. I'm not sure what that one that looked like the cow jumping over the moon meant. And my nephew saw New Jersey at one point. That's probably a bad omen. Anyway, so no offense to everybody in New Jersey, it's just a joke. You can make an X on the top, or some people like to do squares. Just be careful with the square, because sometimes that tends to rise up out of the middle like a cork or something, and it tends to separate from the rest of the loaf. So you want to make sure your lines in the square are far enough apart that they won't touch, but still expand and let it to breathe without making the cork effect. I hope you've enjoyed this segment. Our bread is still baking back there, and I'm looking forward to the final product, and I hope you are too. Maybe we'll get a good reading today. So that sound means we're ready to take our bread out of the oven. This is going to be a little difficult. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this, so let's stop the camera and I'll open that up. Okay, really quickly here, you can see that the loaf has split on the top all on its own. It's a pretty clean split, not very dramatic as some I've seen in the past. So we'll get a reading on that a little bit later. Let's get a good 360-degree view to make our reading. Okay, let's get that on the rack. Because I was talking a little too much, a lot more heat escaped from the oven than I wanted to. So I got to get this back up to about 400 degrees. Let's turn the oven light on. And there's our loaf sitting in there quite happily. That's going to brown up very nicely. I like it darker because it makes the crust a little crustier. But if you like it light, I guess you could consider it done. But I would recommend at least a shade darker than that. When I last left you, I was reheating the oven to about 400 degrees. Once I reached 400 degrees, I turned it off and let it cook on residual heat. And it's been in here for about 20 minutes. Yeah, actually exactly 20 minutes, because I like my crust darker. So here we go. We're going to open it up. Take a look. Ooh, that light's a little bright. Let's try to focus in here, folks. There we go. Very nice. All right, let's bring this out and try to get a reading on this thing. Not sure what I see here. All right, what does this loaf tell us? Kind of looks like a person with his arms out. I don't know, what do you guys see? You're gonna have to let me know. I'm having a hard time reading this one. From that angle, I see kind of like a giraffe. Some kind of petroglyph giraffe from the caves of I don't know, wherever they have caves near giraffes. Well, that's interesting. Oh, that's the same. It's the same angle as before. Hi. So we've reached the end. We're going to let this cool for about an hour. I don't know what this tells us about the future, but there's one thing I do know about the future, and this is going to be a good loaf of sourdough bread. We're going to have it for breakfast tomorrow morning. I know that. and we're going to cut it up and freeze the rest so that it's pre-sliced, and all I have to do is go into the freezer, pull out a piece of sourdough, put it in the toaster, and we're good to go. This stuff is great when it's toasted, especially if you give it two turns in the toaster at full power. You're going to get a nice crusty loaf. Maybe full power 2 full times is a little much. I don't know. It can burn sometimes if I'm not paying attention. Anyway, take my word for it. It smells great. That sour smell just goes all over the house. And yes, I know I just breathed on my loaf of bread, but it's my loaf and I can breathe on it if I want. One last test. Of course, we want to make sure it sounds hollow. I guess that sounds hollow. I don't know, but it's done. I'm telling you. All right, have a good one. I hope you have a successful loaf, and good night. Good morning. As an appendix, I thought I'd show you what my sliced bread looks like. Here's your sourdough, classic pockets, and crusty outside. Now it's not crusty right now because it's been in the bag all night, but you pop that thing in the toaster, you're gonna have a nice crust without it being overbearing. Put some butter on that and you are going to be as close to bread heaven on earth as you can be.